So, the past 100 years of literary theory have basically just been one huge dump on the idea of what an author is. And that's all thanks to this group of intellectuals called structuralists, who basically believe that everything, every story in the English language is all part of the grand structure of the human brain. 50 Shades of Grey is part of the human brain according to these people. There is quite a lot of evidence in favour of the structuralist view. For instance, linguists have been studying the different grammatical structures and the syntax of different languages and different cultures for ages, and they keep on saying the same thing, that there's no culture on the planet anywhere, no matter how isolated or how quote-unquote civilized they are, that doesn't have a language. Nobody's just communicating in stares, because that would be ridiculous and we wouldn't be able to understand each other, and that's not a way that a culture can develop. And anthropologists have found that in every single culture there's also the same familial structure. So you've always got a mother figure, a father figure, and some little ocelots running around that probably plopped out of them at some point. And like all good structuralists, there was a well-known Russian named Vladimir Prop, and he decided that he wanted to put this theory of structuralism to the test. Wouldn't you? So, Prop decided to travel to these just hundreds of primitive villages all over Russia, Soviet Russia as well, and they were thousands of miles apart, and he collected their folk tales. And these had only been passed down orally until he wrote all of them down, and that's pretty cool. Pretty cool until you find out what he did with these things. By looking at all of these different Russian folk tales, Prop found out that there are actually 31 different categories of story, and certain things within those categories that are common to all stories. And he wrote this into a book. And basically it just said that all stories are the same. So, what do you think that means? How does that make writers feel? This was great work for fundamentalism, because if every story is the same or falls into a category, one of these 31 categories, then basically we're all the same and originality is dead. And Prop wrote his greatest work with this idea of the death of originality in mind, subconsciously, and he called it the morphology of the Russian folk tale. Isn't that just a great step for writers everywhere? Not really. See, as a writer of what's theoretically original fiction, Prop's given this idea that you have only 31 categories of story to choose from, and that's just horrible to think about, because that just means that every story is just going to be a variation of the same 31 archetypes of story, and that will just drive you mad when you're trying to be a genius, you know? Because it eventually just winds up like, "Hey, did you hear about that Shakespeare guy that brought out a new play?"
What do you mean, a new play?
Yeah, it's called Romeo and Juliet, and it's about these two teenagers that fall in love together and then they die together, and it's like the newest thing since whole bread.
Oedipus did that first, and he did it much better than this Willie Shakespeare guy.
So, what does this mean from a literary standpoint? Because that's what you're all thinking. So, if it's all the same, then we can't be thinking about the originality of anything anymore, because nothing is original, but what we can think about is the intent of the author, right? Well, critics have actually given this a lot of thought, and after years of deliberation, they've finally come up with an answer to this question. They've decided that we can't actually know the intent of a piece of literature. But there are so many interpretations of literature that sort of every interpretation fails to mean anything because there are so many of them. Like, remember that wheelbarrow poem we looked last week? Do you remember how many interpretations of that there were? Was it about life? Was it about communism? Social stratification? Chicken genocide? So basically there's so many interpretations and so many meanings and double meanings and triple meanings and million meanings in literature, any text really, that you can say anything about any text within reason. But when you can say anything about any text, then you can also say nothing about that text. Because being able to say anything about any text basically makes anything that you do say meaningless because there's so much to say about it. Let me explain. Have you ever been in love? No, actually, have you ever been in love? Like, do you remember the first time that someone said I love you and you said I love you as well? And there was just like butterflies in your stomach and chemicals going off in your brain and everything was made out of sunshine and rainbows and it was the best thing ever? Then you say it again and 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 again, and eventually it just sort of doesn't make you feel the same way anymore. And while there's nothing wrong with that, it's almost as if the idea of love has become less meaningful to you, even though it shouldn't. And eventually you were just saying I love you like it meant nothing. I love you. I love you. I love you. Well, that death of your relationship is basically the same as literature, only as we discussed in the last episode, literature is the death of everything and all of your dreams. So what I'm trying to say is, basically, the more you try and give a text meaning, the more it's going to stop meaning anything, because there's just so much surrounded with it, and that's why a lot of people find the wheelbarrow poem and not a very nice poem to look at, because you can get literally anything from this stupid wheelbarrow. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why don't we just ask the author what their intent is and just turn off this video and go and phone Shakespeare or whatever, because I'm sure he's still around to answer your questions. The problem with asking the writer for the meaning and the intent behind what they've written is text doesn't die. Writing is immortal, people are not. Not to mention the intention that the writer had for the text does change over time, or it can change over time. Take J.K. Rowling for example. She put Ron and Hermione together in just the cutest little way, and now in interviews she says that she wants them divorced and they're not actually good for each other at all. That's not okay. That's all of our childhood's ruined right there. But that's her new intention that wasn't there when she wrote the last book. So does that mean that she has to rewrite the book, or that we all have to stop shipping Ron and Hermione? No. Luckily there was this French writer called Bart, who basically claimed that when a work goes public, the writer is as good as dead, but the reader is born. And what I like to think he meant by that is that the work of the writer becomes open to the interpretation of the reader, and that's what gives it any meaning. Writers as good as J.K. Rowling can't be trusted to give their work a steady intent, then it falls to the readers to be able to give a meaning or an intent to what they're reading. And in a way that sort of makes the reader become the author in this terrifying cycle. So, moral of the story, we're all writers, only we're also not writers because reasons. Anyway, that's all I have for you today, so please like, share and subscribe so that my cat can afford to eat, because look at this face, you know you want to subscribe for more of her. Don't they, Mushka? And before I go, please just check out this really cool poetry blog. They're called Misstree, link in the description. And they were kind enough to nominate me for a Liebster Award, and I've never heard of it, but it was very nice of them, so check out their poetry. It's all amazing, and there's a lot of trees in it, luckily. If you like trees, I like trees. They're cool. Trees. Yeah. And if you like cats, she also has 2 of them, and they're adorable. And I will see you all on Thursday. Bye!